Hemshech Ayin Beis, chapter 70, bottom of page Kuf Lamed 130. We did 3 takes on 69, chapter 69, so it's time to move on. But briefly, the summary is, he's talking now about the levels of transcendence, the levels of Keser. He spoke about Keser, Tehiri Allah, the Igul Hagadol, the big sphere before the Tzimtzum, so Ratzon Klali. Its impact is on that the Keli, the body should be receptive to Elokus, the bittul of the body. Then there's the Mak of Klali after the Tzimtzum, which is Ak. Its impact is the bittul general of the worlds, and specifically Pnimius Ak, the inner type of Ak is on the Shamis, that they have Mesiras Nefesh, Amunah Pshuta, simple faith, and the bittul to the Baal Harotz, Nasav and Nishma. Then he moved to Kesher Vatzilis. Its effect is on the souls, Ru'usa de Libo, the desire of the heart, the hidden love. It's closer. The bottom line is that each level of transcendence gets closer to Pnimius and has more impact in it, but it's all transcendent levels. Then he began discussing, after summarizing it, the other lower levels of Keser Briya, Yitzir, and Asiya, and said they're all hinted to with Atzilus in the Birchus Yetzer, in the prayer in Yetzer, which we say before Shema, which is Adenu Zenu Tzur Mizgavenu Magin Yeshenu Mizgav Ba'adenu. So Adon is the Makiv of Atzilus, Tzur is the Makiv of Briya, Magin is the Makiv of Yitzir, and Mizgav is the Makiv of Asiya. To explain that, he said the beginning of Pesukah de Zimra, which is Birchus Yetzer, is the end of Pesukah de Zimra. Birchus Krishma, ready at it. The beginning we said Baruch She'amar V'hoya Eilam. Baruch She'amar V'hoya Eilam refers to Amar, the one who said, means when it arose in his desire. Bereish Rumanusa de Malka, in the language of the Zohar. Torim Shenitzala Netzalim Eirel and Pasha, Eirel and Pasha, Lashon of the language of the Eitz Chaim, means there's Atzmus, there's a state of the field of energy called Eir Ein Sof. There a desire arose. His desire is still a makif, transcendent, but it's already a specific dimension to some extent. And that desire arose then the 10 hidden spheres, which is the root of the immanent energy. Now this desire begins to have relatively a relationship to existence because it's a desire for it. Okay? But it's still a state of desire, which is very much reflective of the source. So what you're dealing with here is, you're seeing in the interface, you're seeing God in his purest form would be like Eir Ein Sof. Ratzon is still a reflection of an expression of the essence. And then the immanent, of course, is within existence, but then you have Ksarim, transcendence, that are like Memutzayim. Interfaces within the interface, that they're either closer in relationship to the Pnimi, like I said, back the key chapter 59, where he speaks how Makif is Shaykh al Pnimi. That even though a Makif is an equalizer, but it still has a relationship with the Pnimius. And actually the Pnimi came from the Makif. It originated there. So, thus, we're trying to understand the relationship between transcendence and existence, because the key dilemma is, which one is it? Is it immanent or is it beyond us? The challenge is to find both a place where they meet. That is beyond, and you can make it integrated. So the Makifim Pratim play a key role here, because they're the ones that begin to bring transcendence more on our level. So if you talk about Ak, for example, so Ak's impact, Amunah Pshuta, it's an equalizer. Atzilus impact is already more specific. It's the thoughts of tshuva, the love you have.
Also has the Yosha and the Igulim. Also has the.
That's within Ak, but I'm talking about Ak's impact on us is the Igulim of Ak, the Makif of Ak. The Yosha of Ak may not have an impact on us. According to what he says here, it doesn't have an impact on us. Because the Yosha of Ak could be so high that it's behelim from us. He's talking about the Makifim of Ak. Of course, in each world, everything again has both. It's also part of the interface. But he has not covered Yesher of Ak. Right now, he's just talking about Makifim and Pnimim. That's the key discussion for the last 69 chapters. He's moving now to Makif, but now he's explaining how Makif. I'm explaining the purpose of the Makifim. Makifim are what wake us up that there's something beyond the system that you live in. As I said, if you go without Makifim, you could also come to recognize God, but it'll be a God on the terms of existence. Like animals. They recognize there's a God, they follow orders. But there's nothing for them that's transcendent. The transcendence is what brings in, introduces. That's what I say. When a person's Meiser Nefesh gives his life, when he fasts, he's going against nature. So it has to be. So it's revealing, as he said, the witness, Eidus Yisrael. It's a testimony to Stima de Kol Stimen, because their behavior of controlling themselves, of this unnatural way of imposing on yourself to do something, to break your body, iskafia, is revealing a higher level in Aveda, so to speak. And then, so this is chapter 69, he just put things into context. So the Ratzon, as it travels downward, is the Boruch Shomer V'Haya Elam, as he said, two interpretations, V'Haya, Simcha, that comes from the Birur, transformation, Lashon Asid, and V'Haya, that it's immediate. It immediately impacts and causes the desire to arise. And then the final piece in 69, chapter 69, was that it's all Rishus V'Ratzon. That's V'Haya Oimer. It's really Hizbonus and Baruch Shamar, V'Haya Elam. Blessed is he who says, which means it's coming from his desire. It's a desire to have a desire. As he says, what's the Rishus? So he explained, because of the Yechelis, it's coming from the state of Yechelis, so there's nothing compelled. That's what God wishes to happen. But you can't call it a Ratzon, you call it a Yechelis. That's what it's called. That's chapter 69, and as I said, I elaborated already on this. So we move now to chapter 70, bottom of page Kuflam at 170. Now this desire, which desire? The first desire that arose within the Erein Sof is a Ratzon Kloli. She'ein bo adayin inyonim pratim klal. It has no details in it yet. V'zeu shekosa Baruch she'amar. See, it's all beer in Baruch she'amar. So remember, so this is what it says, Baruch she'amar, shehu b'chinas amira achas levad. It doesn't say Baruch she'amar, Amar. He said, it's one saying, it's one amira, it's one utterance. V'agam shebehechach lemer. Even though we must say, Sha'rotzen, Gam Kedem Ha'ashara. So now he's going. The Ratzon, even before he envisioned, remember, let's just break this down again. Erein Sof, Etzem Ha'er, no name on it. Spashus Ha'er, you have Ratzon. But in Ratzon itself, there's a Hashara B'Keach, there's a lower level, where he now envisions and allocates and estimates what he's going to need for the 10, and that's the 10 hidden spheres. She says, you have to say that desire, even before the Hashara, even before you allocate the 10 spheres, encompasses, includes within it everything that's going to come. So you see here, if you read the lines, you see how he's the precise dissecting of each level. But I'm trying to get to what the purpose of it is. Why is it so important? Because it's all about how the two connect. And you constantly see the paradox. Is it a Ratzon? Is it details? So now he's going. So even though you cannot say it doesn't yet have details, you have to say it encompasses in it everything that will come. Now remember, this is not the encompassing of Ak. Before he spoke about how Ak encompasses as opposed to Keser Vatzilis, the two levels of Ratzon. The we call pre-Ratzon, where it's still only a Heskem, and then there's the actual driven Ratzon, the desire where you actually are driven to it. Here he's going obviously higher. So he's saying it's all in there. Hinizeu behelam legamri baratzon hakloli. This, that it encompasses it all, is completely concealed in this general macrocosmic desire. Ve'enim nikodim hapratim klal gam le'la'atzmei. And it's not distinct or distinguishable at all, these details, at all, even to himself.
Even to Etzem? Atzmo.
No, what would you say?
I mean, this is the term Atzmo.
No, the Ratzon itself, the Atzmo.
The Atzmo is not Ratzon.
That's what I think.
Do you think it's the Ratzon? He's referring to Ratzon as Atzmoi?
First of all, you could...
Because when we talk about Atzmo, we cannot define.
He's exactly right. Either way, it's not a problem. You keep going back to your mathematical formulas. I'm telling you can't think like that. If you took before the Ratzon, then for sure there's no details. There's no details altogether. You're talking about a state of Atzmos Ratzon is already a beginning of a structure. So that's a chiddush. To say before the Ratzon is that there's no pratim, there are no pratim, the whole thing means that there's no existence.
It says here that it's not. He's that's exactly what I'm saying. It's said by Helam Lagamri. I mean, it's completely concealed. It's general Ratzon, and it's not even said himself.
To himself, to the Ratzon.
That's okay. That's you're learning Ratzon.
It doesn't make a difference if it's Ratzon.
You cannot talk about
That's not what he's getting. He doesn't get that. He thinks that you could. You can't. He's 100%. You're right. You can't. Of course you can't. Let me explain it again. I keep telling you, this is not going to be understood until you stop trying to fit atzmus into our structure. In atzmus, there are no pratim. You can't even make the statement. You can't even say helam legami b'rotzon akoli ein mekarim pratim. You can't say anything like that in atzmus because there's no helam, there's no gili, there's no existence. If let's put it this way, if existence comes straight from atzmus or Ein Sof without all these levels, we do not have existence as you know it. Or it's an existence that we simply will never be able to relate to in any logical fashion. So, if you go there, you're dealing with a reality that is not. It's impossible for us to exist in that reality. We couldn't be sitting and talking about it. The fact that we can talk about it means that this reality, God's reality, chose and created a reality that is structured. That structure, as it's seen by Atzmus, is not the way it's seen by us.
I mean, we can relate.
We are blinded.
When we doubt.
To some extent. Remember I said yesterday it's qualitative journey. You're not going to get this. This is not about what's behind door 1 and door 2 and just open the door. It's not that. You cannot go there if you don't have more sublime type of understanding. This is the whole key to this whole thing. This is right here, is what we're right touching is the crux of where everybody makes a mistake with Chassidus. They're trying to fit higher levels and to understand them on lower levels. They're not understandable that way.
We should say some feeling before we start learning.
However, listen to this. Listen to the words here. You're dealing with subtler levels. The whole point of this is trying to teach us how there's a state of there's something already there, Ratzon, but no way does it have any details. That's the chiddush. To say that there are details, to ask a question, aren't there details before, defeats the whole purpose of this. That would be like saying, like this, listen to this. We have a seed in the ground. That's the way God created the world. Seeds sprout. And you could teach a child, you see, and we'll give you 5 stages. Here's the seed, I just put it in the ground. 3 weeks later, it starts to blossom. You see little things. 4 weeks later, 5 weeks later, you could, a whole process of the gestation or whatever you call it. Same thing with a fetus. What do we learn from this? We learn that God created an order. Creation doesn't just happen. Poof. Everything is a system. And you can retrace the steps. And if you want to understand God better, you got to go from the tree to the seed. So you're going to say to me, so I'll say to you, what about the seed? Does the seed have all the details of the tree? Yeah, of course it has. But it's in a state that's it's not distinct. It's in a state that if you open up the seed, you're not going to have a tree, and you can't eat apples off a seed. Let's put it that way. Bottom line is you don't have apples out of the tree. And so someone will say, 1 second. So it's all behelim in the seed. I'm just using an example. It's not even a good example because the seed is already ak. Not even this Ratzon, but just as an example. So someone will say, 1 second. Pratim gam lo la'atzmei. There's no details even to himself. Let's say himself is not the seed. The details are not known to the one who planted the seed. What's the answer? Of course, then you don't have a seed. You're not talking about a seed. You're talking about atzmos. It's nothing to do with our reality. That God knows that He wants to create a world. Of course He knows. But then you're not even talking pratim klolim. We're talking about in our existence, there's a state where the pratim are completely concealed, which means they reflect the essential desire of God. And this is also a second key point. We're not talking about, if you start talking about the details outside of the seed, you're not talking about our world. You're talking about a completely different reality. From God's thoughts about what is coming, you're not going to have a seed, you're not going to have a tree. He wants a seed and a tree. We need an interface here. An interface that goes both ways, from God to us and from us to God. So number one that I just made statement is that yes, there's a state where you can't even say, so it says, Pratim gam lo la'atzmei. So you literally say, what do you mean? God doesn't know the details? But that we're talking about. The way God knows the details is not details as we understand them. Because if you want to speak from God's perspective, He kept saying, there are no details in God. Can you say an Atzmus is made up of a composite of details? No, Atzmus is not made up of any details. He's not the total sum of parts. He doesn't have parts. The word part doesn't even make sense there. There's a reality that we cannot relate to. To talk about it as having parts is basically trying to impose our reality on God. And that is is the cardinal sin, so to speak. You can't do that. You're trying to say is, what do you mean? Everything in this world is details. Okay, I understand it in the seed level. So you have to say God is even a bigger seed than the seed. He's not a physical seed, he's a spiritual seed. So I'm telling you clearly, it's not the case. You cannot go from the earth and define God based on our understanding of seeds and details. Because all these details did not have to be, that's what the whole point is. It could have been a different way. In the way it's in the God presence, you can't even extrapolate. Lifnei HaTzimtzum, I said, through the Shlila, you could at least say that it's because the state of consciousness, at least. You also can't really relate it, because it's completely divine. But Atzmos, you can't even talk about anything. It's not a bigger seed. Because what you're doing is you're saying, I'm looking at the world and I'm saying, oh, God must be the first cause. That's the whole point where Chassidus talks about why Aristotle and the Rambam somewhat, by them they got to God as being the first cause. First cause is the last thing. Chassidus sees the first cause as being, so just a matter like I said with the guy from Chelam. So he's the last train. We're small and God is the mover of it all. To make God a mover means that he's really part of existence, except we're the ones that are being moved and he's moving us. God is not defined by a mover. He's not limited by that. He's beyond. His reality is completely different reality. His reality, the God that scientists and philosophers have come to is a God of existence. Basically saying, you must say, just like there's an art, has an artist, there's a world, has a painter. And to say that is sacrilegious, is not acceptable, because God's reality is completely different than our reality, and we will never understand it with our minds. But it's interesting. Yeah, but Aid is nish seichel.
Yeah.
So what are you taking now? You're talking about intelligence?
No.
But we're going back to exactly this. The reason I feel I talked about this for a few hours at this table. So the question I'm asking myself is, why is it not getting through? My only answer, honestly, is because you guys insisting on keeping thinking on your terms. You refuse to go on other terms. You refuse to go to a place that is not on our terms. You want to abstract a bit, but it's still on our terms. And I'm telling you, you can't do that. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu does. You can't see God and live on your terms.
You'll have to come back to it all the time.
No, by the way, I'm in the same world as you, but I know at least that's what you have to do. Why don't you realize that that's what has to be done? I understand.
He wants to get the ultimate. He wants the ultimate Chinese food. He wants the ultimate.
I got what you're saying. Okay.
That's it. A Jew yearns for the ultimate.
Okay, 1 second. So
that's why you always want to try to get there.
Okay, but the Rabbi Chassidus will tell you, maybe you need to be silent for 3 years before you can even go into the door. Okay? So no, fine, very much. You may want it too much, and maybe that's not good. So it's good to want it. But then you have to realize, if you really want it, like the Rebbe told people said to the Rebbe certain things, the Rebbe said, you really want it from me, or you want it as you want it? If you want it from me, then it's going to come when I want, not when you want. Talk about God, seeing God and living. I wrote about this because it's very fascinating to me. The Medrash says, the Gemara says, what Medrash? The Gemara says, when Moshe asked God, show me your face, Hareini noch chvedecha, that's the expression, show me your glory. And these days, right now, it must have been around now, and God says to him, Lo yireini adam, no person can see me, v'chay, and live. Then God says, you'll see my back, upani lo yiro, not my face, right? I've explained that second piece. 1 second. So the Gemara says something really strange. And the Rebbe once explained it in a fascinating way. The Gemara says, God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, when I wanted to show you my face, you didn't want to look. Because by the burning bush, God said, Moshe covered his face, and God said, look at me. And Moshe covered his face in awe and humility. He says, when I wanted to show you my face, you didn't look. Now when you want to see it, I'm not going to show it to you.
Tit for tat?
That's the question. That's the Gemara. 1 second. What is this? God's getting even? The Rebbe asked this. 1 second. I wrote a whole article on this topic itself. No, it's not tit for tat. It means who's calling the shots here. When I wanted to show it to you, and there was and on my terms, then you decided you want to stand in awe and bittul. Now you want to see it. You can't see me when you want to see me. If you want me, it's me, not you. Even if Moshe didn't have a desire for Chinese food. He had a desire for God, but it's his desire. And that was limited him. You want to see me, it's going to be when you stop looking and when you stop. That's the real bittul. That's the depth of this Gemara. So it's not tit for tat. God is saying to him that. Now at the end of the day, he does show himself, but by lo yiro. My point that I'm trying to make here is, yes, we want it all, the cake and eat it too, as they say. But you know something? The Osud Lave, when we'll be united and the Kav will go down, we'll have it all. But that doesn't come without a Holocaust, okay? And with a lot of pain.
It's all done.
And with a lot of prices to pay. Don't get me wrong, I'm not justifying the Holocaust. I'm trying to say it's a deep avodah that this comes with. Deep avodah to allow yourself to be a container for Atzmos, not for Erev. So I understand you want it, but I'm just trying to say is, do me a favor. You don't have to be on this level of understanding, but you have to say to yourself when you ask certain questions, is the questions coming from my terms and I'm trying to fit it into my box? Or can I really try to relate to another box? If you don't begin to try to be open to relate to another box, you're never going to get Chassidus. You're never going to get what needs to be gotten here, which is thinking truly out of the box. Because what you're doing is trying to fit the out of the box into your box. That's the end of the day. I have no problem doing this. I don't care if I spoke 3 hours. I don't mind about speaking 3,000 hours. It's not my time. I'm trying to say is I'm trying to figure out what more can be said. So I'm trying to say it like this. So this is exact example. It doesn't really matter. What I just said. It doesn't even matter how you define it. It could be the Ratzon. It could be God. It's fine. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because details don't exist there. If you're talking about higher than Ratzon, then altogether you can't even say Pratim. You see, you're having a problem because you can't understand how an all-knowing God doesn't know the details. That's your problem. And I'm telling you, that problem is a childish problem on this world. That's not a problem for Atzmos. He doesn't have to know things to know them, okay? Can you relate to that statement? He doesn't need details to know the details are there. He's not made of details. Now, we can't relate to that because we don't have an example for such a thing.
Why would it ever make a statement
I'm just trying to understand
Why
the
would he say
statement.
No, but I'm taking it a step further. I don't know if you're sure that's what you just want to know the word. What's bothering you? Who cares? Yeah, God does. Let's say the Atzmos. Let's say it's the level of Atzmos. Is there a problem? Yes, because you can't understand how God cannot know the details. I'm saying Atzmos. If it's Atzmos, do you have a problem? Okay, great. Then I thought you would have a problem. I thought
Why
you'd
would
say.
it ever say it in such a way that we show them the misinterpretation?
Where's the misinterpretation? I wouldn't even have stopped here. I had no problem with this line. I don't know what the problem is even. What is the problem exactly?
It's not a question of problem. It's just I'm trying to just simply define, understand the whole thing.
So everything I just said was not even the issue.
I got a lot of.
Okay, you know what? Let me go back.
Define what you're saying. I'm not trying to be picayune here. The whole Ayin Beis is trying to discuss, as I see it, illuminate all these extreme, delicate things, how they all fit.
Okay, one second.
Beautiful, holistic.
If you want to know my suggestion is let's continue learning, and you'll have it clear as we go on.
That's a good answer.
Okay.
No, that's what Rabbi, Dr. Branover in his book Return says that when he became, it's a very fascinating story. It's worth saying this one. He said when he became a Baal Tshuva and learning with some tzaddik in Russia, he came they started with Bereshis. You ever saw this? The story? He says he's Bereshis, and he asked up 400 shilas on Bereshis, and then Bara, another 1,000 questions. And the rabbi said to him, do me a favor. You can't learn that way. You got to makabel. He says, write down in a diary all your questions. And I promise you, once we go through the whole Chumash, take out that book and I'll try to answer every single one of your questions. But first, just speak, as you said, just listen.
Okay.
And makabel. And he did it.
Anyway.
He said, but at the end of the Chumash, he said, like 90% of them were, 80%, I don't know the exact one, most of them were already answered. He didn't have their answer to the question.
Okay, let's continue here.
Okay.
So I started saying like this. Let's start here again. So we're saying this Ratzon Kloli. Remember again, I gave a whole introduction. We're dealing with interfaces here. We're dealing with first all the chapters that talked about immanent energy, that are tailored, that are commensurate, proportionate. An air fits a keli like the faculties. Then we talk about transcendence. Transcendence is above. But now we're discussing how transcendence impacts existence, and there are different levels of transcendence because transcendence is shayach el apnimi, makif shayach el apnimi. So levels of transcendence impact, which really means, like in the whole interface we're discussing, interface is a connection of two realities. One is an existence like ours, which is made of structure and details. One is God and the divine, which has no structure and no details. Can these two ever meet? We made We discussed this many times, and the goal is that they have to meet. That's the purpose. Dira b'tachtenim. That's what Atzmus wants, as he says. He has a desire for something that's nivdil matzmuseh. That's the word he used.
That's the pre-desire.
No. Much higher than that. It's the source itself.
It's Rabbi, about 10, 12 lines in volume or line that he named on Jacobson.
That's hard to pre-desire.
Where? Which line? Which page?
Kuf Lamed.
Yeah. So he desired something that should be separate and that it should connect. So how do you connect two entities like this that are so different, infinite and finite, gvul and bli gvul, etc., etc.? The answer is that there's an elaborate interface. It began with an interface, the interface between energy and containers. Then he moved on and saying that it's even higher than that. So really, Makif and Primi is a key, because Makif introduces God's perspective. That's why it's an equalizer. And you don't see the details there. On the other hand, Primi is about the details. So now we're talking about Makifim that have some relationship with the details, but they're a distant relationship. So if you talk Eirein Sof Lifnei Hatzimtzum, like he said before, it wasn't even Oler B'Ritzena yet. It's a complete amorphous field of energy that doesn't have anything, doesn't even have a desire for a desire. Okay? Then arose a desire, he says, Oler B'Ritzena, or the words of the Zohar, Bereish Menusa de Malka. I'm using words specifically from Ayin Beis right here, so we know what words we're talking about. Bereish Menusa de Malka means Betchila, in the beginning when there was the permission and the desire of the king. For what? Desire for existence. That will evolve into a hashara, where God will envision 10 spheres. We discussed earlier there's a level before the arising of desire, there's the rising of the desire, there's the desire for the 10 spheres, there's a level where there's infinite spheres, there's a level where there are no spheres. Here he's not mapping it all out, here he's just talking about this specific area, how Ein Sof Rotzen. So now he begins this chapter and says this Rotzen, though it's lower than it's a Rotzen Klali. Now if you want to understand the logic of it, where he's going, he wants to show you that here's a key component to the interface. There's Ein Sof as one element. Ein Sof represents the Atzmos, as we spoke. Rotzen now is, which one does it represent? It really represents also the Ein Sof, because it's really Rotzen, as we spoke at length, is not a faculty. Its focus is only one thing, revealing the expression of the essence, etzem. But it's now in a Rotzen state. It's no longer in an Eir state. That's the key thing here that we learned in the last chapter. Now he's dissecting the Rotzen state further. So he's saying, what about the details? All the details that are going to come, what's their relationship with this Rotzen? I gave the example of a seed. It's not really, a seed is not a good example because a seed is already a Gashmi, and so is a tree. A seed would be much more Ak. He's talking here the Rotzen Klali before the Tzimtzum. He's talking more Tehiri law. But relatively speaking, think about it, that it's a state where there's this beginning of the Rotzen. So he's saying, it's a mirah, that's Baruch Sha'omar. Omar means one word, one utterance. Why? Because this Rotzen encompasses everything. He's saying, now, because even though you have to say the Rotzen has everything that will be coming, because it's a desire that is going to be mak of everything, but the way they stand there, they're completely concealed, completely, in the Klali, and they're not even recognized to himself. Okay. Himself, he's going to say in the parentheses, and you'll understand it more from the parentheses, but if I would read it, to me himself can be the Rotzen itself. You can interpret like you said. It can mean the level before the Rotzen, Ein Sof. It can mean Atzmos. I would probably not say Atzmos because there you don't even talk about Nicker, not Nicker. Because there it's beyond, you don't speak that language. I would say it means to the source of where the Rotzen is coming from. Or to the Rotzen. It doesn't really change the picture. You know why? Because what does it mean not Nicker to himself? Because remember, there's a stage, as we're going to learn in a moment, where it is Nicker. Like for example, I spoke about, like we spoke before about Rotzen, there's a stage where you have a desire, but you're not yet, it's like Machshava is Gili La'atzmi. Dibur is a Gili to another. But there's a state where you have ideas in your mind right now that are not even revealed to you, but they're there. So the same thing on a Rotzen level, you can have, like he spoke about Rotzen HaMuchlet, for example. You may not even be conscious of it. That's the point here. Then there's going to be a level where the Rotzen has, to himself at least, he knows the details. Which is already a lower step in the interface, which makes the transcendence closer to reality. That's why this is critical. He's trying to show you how now the Ratzon is not Eir, but it's also not Pratim Afil La'atzmei. So it's really the gradation. There's like, the interface has to be a perfect one. You want total fusion. For it to be total fusion, you need to have complete representation of divine singularity and complete representation of our diversity. That's the bottom line. So Ratzon is now the place where he's discussing this Ratzon Klali.
The original Ratzon was made by the Or Ein Sof.
It came within the Or Ein Sof, yeah. Okay. Now in the parentheses he adds, the Bederach Klal b'chinas Or Ein Sof shelifnei tzimtzum b'chinas gilui la'atzmei levad. Because generally speaking, the infinite light before the tzimtzum is a level of gilui la'atzmei levad. It means it's a gilui, but it's to himself. As I said, Atzmus is not even a gili. You can't call it gili. Eir is a gili atzmei levad. Example would be as a person thinking to himself. So it's God within himself thinking about what he wants. That's Eir and so. That's in general.
That's still the tzimtzum, basically.
Yeah, b'chlal. B'frat, it's many more. B'frat, because everything that comes afterwards is there too. But b'chlal essentially is that. Yes, it's only an example. The example I just gave is that before you begin to create, you think to yourself everything you want. No one knows about it. If you stop right there, nothing's going to happen. No one could enter into your mind. It's not a perfect example, but it's somewhat of an example of what means a state of reality that's within yourself. Remember, it's not an example because our machshava is already a tangible reality. In God's lifnei tzimtzum, there's nothing tangible. But it's an example. Like I said, you can't really see behind the curtain, but you can imagine that whatever exists within God's consciousness in some way. That's what he wants it to be that way. He doesn't have to be there, but he wants it that way. What does it mean in God's consciousness? That you can sit and talk about and extrapolate and negate and so on. But it's something. That's what he's saying right now. He's mamish speaking to us here. But when you speak about the detailed levels in Sheba Ein Sof, in Ein Sof, that level of Ratzon we just described is in Atzmusei Gufa B'chinas Ha'era Shayech El Azulus. What Ratzon Hanal? He means the Ratzon for existence. I guess he means the Ashari here.
No, the Ratzon Klali, no?
No, because he just said the Ratzon Klali is Gam Leila Atzmei. So what do you mean? He just said Gilei La'atzmei. So you can't say, he's not talking about the lower Ratzon here. The Ratzon Hanal is a let's finish and you'll see. Like it says elsewhere, what are you saying, Perek Tazayin? Let's just see for a second, so I know what we're talking about. Perek Tazayin. Okay, yeah. That there's the Eira Gvul and the Eira Bli Gvul. Yeah. He's talking about the lower one, for sure. Okay. Good. 100%. There's not even a question. No, I'm looking at Perek Tazayin. I wanted to just see what he said. Yeah. Correct. Exactly right. Okay, yeah. So that lower level, that's already within, even though everything in general is Gilui La'atzmei, this is already Shayech El Azulas. Why? Because it's the 10 hidden spheres that are connected to existence. Ach b'derech klal, however, in general, Mashalifnei Tzimtzum HaKol Hu La'atzmei Adayin. In general, that which exists before the Tzimtzum is in general all to yourself. La'atzmei Adayin. And that's why this simple, this seamless desire, where the details are not distinguishable yet, it means that they're also not distinguishable to himself as well.
It's Boruch.
Does the protein haven't been invented yet?
I think the whole paragraph, parenthesis, talking about that. It doesn't make a difference which one is talking about. Just talk about what's in the cloud before the Simpson. So that's one.
Enochanami. No, Enochanami, you don't need to say what I just said. I broke it down because there are two levels, but it's correct. Because you could go the other way around. Basically saying that the Ratzon for existence, or the Ratzon even of the Esser spheres, says, even Kaidem Hashara, that's where I was, includes everything in it, but there's no details revealed, even to yourself. Then in the parentheses said, because in general, the Eir Lifnei Tzimtzum is only to yourself. The problem is, there's a problem here. No, it's not that simple. I thought it was simpler. Because there's three levels here. There's the Gili to the Er Shaykh Azulas, there's Gili La'atzmei, and there's Gili not even La'atzmei. You see? The question is, what's what here? So he just said, one second, so he said that this Ratzon is not even revealed to himself. So he says, in general, Er Ein Sof is a Gili La'atzmei, is already revealed. Mm-hmm. And when you speak in details, this Ratzon that we're talking about here, that he says not even a Gili to himself, is related to that which is outside of himself, the Zulas, which means it is a Gili.
Still that. The level that is a Zulas, the Teich,
but derech klal, mashlifnei etzem hakol hu la'atzmei adayin. No, I go back to what I said. I know it is talking about the lower Ratzon. You have to say here. There's three levels here for sure. You understand what I'm saying? Why? Because he says it's not even revealed to himself, the Ratzon, the details. Then he says in general, Eir Sof Tzimtzum is revealed to himself. So right there you have another level. So then how is he saying it's not revealed to himself? So he says because there's two levels going on here. In detail, when you break it down in detail, this Ratzon is connected to existence. There's a Ratzon that's connected to existence. But in general, since in general everything is to himself still, so the Ratzon that's higher than the one related to existence, Ratzon HaPashut, where there's no details, that you can call is not even revealed yet to himself. This parenthesis is a little confusing. Because he begins, is it revealed to himself? No, not revealed to himself. You have any way of understanding Pshat in this? Better than what I just said?
I just don't understand something, because in my understanding what it says here is when you say Shayach le'atzmei means the protim einam nikorim. That's what I thought is the same thing basically. When you say Shayach le'azulas, then protim start to matter. So they incorporates it.
Yeah, you have to say he's talking about a higher Ratzon here. Because as soon as he makes the rule, that's just very specifically that the general Eir Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, what is its role? Is it a Gili to Atzmei or not a Gili to Atzmei?
In general, Atzmei.
Okay. It's a Gili to Atzmei. But he just said that the protim is not nikorim afil leila atzmei. So where does that fit in?
Why? I think that's the opposite. When you say la'atzmei, it means protim, like you said, like you were describing atzmut basically before, I think. So in a way...
Well, so you're saying this la'atzmei is not a student to this leila atzmei? What are you telling me? No, then no way. No? What's the parentheses coming to add then?
So how can you talk about protim then? That's what parentheses come to explain, I think.
No, you could say that Protim are not Nikr, but to himself they are Nikr. The Gamle La'atzmi is saying even to himself they're not Nikr. You could say that they're Nikr, but to yourself. You could say they're not Nikr to anyone but to you. That is such a level. That's what before the parentheses. Then he's going on and saying, in general is Gili La'atzmi Levad. Which includes meaning the details too. But then when you speak in detail before the Tzimtzum, he's saying there's something that's connected to another. But in general, Hakolu La'atzmi Adayin. Okay, so now we're back to this. That in general everything is to himself. So then how do you say that it's not even revealed to himself? So he says, in the first level, Ratzon, it is Nikra Pratim. And that's Pratis is called Shayach al Azulis, and Bechlolos is called Gilil Atzmei. But the Ratzon Poshet, where there's no Pratim, the Fnei HaShara, Adayin, Hainu She'en Nikodim Adayin Gam La'atzmei. That's what he's saying. That's what Pashtas Pshat in the parentheses. It's not a simple parenthesis, but that's what he's saying. You hear? I don't see any other way to read it. So in other words, the parentheses before Gam Kaidim HaShara is very vital here. In the desire, there are two levels. The desire before there's details, then there's the Hashara of details. So you could say, it's not Gili to anyone else, but to yourself, you know there's 10 spheres. So he's saying, in the Hashara, the Proteus, you know to yourself that there's 10 spheres. But in the Ratzon Poshet, that doesn't yet have the details, even to yourself it's not known, even though before the Tzimtzum B'chlal is a Gili La'atzmi. That's what he's saying here. I don't see any other way to interpret it here. Where? He's saying it comes... No, he told Leila Atzmi. That's the question here. Does he himself yet have the details in his own vision or not? So he's saying there's a state where he does not. Even though in general, Lifnei Tzimtzum is a Gil La'atzmi. That's what he's...
So you see, in the La'atzmi itself, there are a few vital...
Yeah. One is Shayach Lazulas. See, the beginning
is not Shayach Lazulas, basically.
But relatively speaking. Look at line 2, Ratzon Hanal. That's what throws you. What Hanal? Which Hanal? Are we talking about the Ratzon Kloli? So it looks to me that there's two Ratzons, because there's Ratzon Hanal is Shayach Lazulas, and then he says 2 lines later, Ratzon HaPoshet is not even recognized to himself.
We're talking about the Ashor.
L'cheira. Yeah. I'll read it again, but I think that's the Pshat. V'zeu inyan Boruch Hu, and that's Boruch Hu. Remember Boruch Shamar. No, then Boruch Shamar v'haya elam Boruch Hu. So now he's going now to the conclusion. He's doing the davening here. So we said Boruch Shamar is an Amira Achas, because in this state the Ratzon is kloli and doesn't even have details even to himself. Okay. Even though there's a state, a lower state, where the details are there to himself, and then of course there's the details as they come to the other. Now that's the B'zeu in Baruch Shahu that comes after Baruch Shamar Elam Shahu Am Shachas Elam Ela Gili. What's the addition? You say Baruch Sha'amar V'Haya Elam. Blessed is the one that said the Ratzon Klali. And there should be a world. What's the second Baruch Hu? So he says that's already the revelation. Am Shachas Ha'elam, the transmission of the concealment that should come from it should be the concealed should be revealed. That which was concealed with his desire should start coming first revealed to himself. Baruch Hu. Baruch is the word from Shacha. You understand? So Baruch Sha'amar, blessed is the one that arose in his desire all of existence, but all of existence there, the details are not even revealed to himself. Baruch Hu is being mamshir that to the level of Gili La'atzmei. Here, v'hu inyan ha'ashara b'koyach. I'm correct. This confirms the parentheses. Because remember, when he wrote the parentheses, you knew what he's writing. So this is the hashara b'koyach. Hashara b'koyach is already in the consciousness, the divine consciousness. It's a consciousness about Esesphiris. Earlier we learned, obviously it's all amorphous there, and the Esesphiris are part of Bligvul. And as we learned from the perspective of above, it's all Eir. It's not details. But he arose in him Esesphiris Agnuzis. So there's a level before Esesphiris Agnuzis, that's clear. That's Baruch Sha'amar, Amira Achas. Baruch Hu is bringing it into the Hashara B'Keach.
It means that here the spheres know of themselves.
I wouldn't say that. No, there is no spheres. No, there's no spheres. It means that God is allowing not just his general consciousness to be, he's now being conscious, beginning the consciousness of existence is starting to take place. It's all about Gili La'atzmi Elokus. To the Beira, Boruch Hu. There's no independent entities here.
So then Eliezer's questions come back.
No, you're not talking about Atzmus. We're not talking about. We're talking about the consciousness of. Remember, everything is playing itself on the quilt. Eid Ein Sof. Eid Ein Sof. You can say. Let me go back to what I've said before. You can say Eid Ein Sof is Bli Gvul. Then comes the creation of Gvul, where there's no way for us to get back to the pure consciousness of the divine. Forget about Atzmus. Eid Ein Sof. And the only way to do it is by eliminating our parameters. Like the Rambam says, ultimate schar, neshamas on gufim. You can't, Elam Hazah cannot go there because, you could say that. He established throughout Hemshech Ayin Beis that's not the case because also the Eir has Siyur. The Eir has Siyur all the way in the root, Eses Sfiras Hagnuzis. If you go according to the sheet of the Pardes, that Eses Sfiras Hagnuzis is only Sheresh HaKelim, not Sheresh HaEir, your argument can make is that you can never enter the world of Eir with your parameters.
And we're talking about Eir.
Yes. So we're saying we could enter Eir. Okay. Now the question, however, is how far can you go? There's a point where you could say, okay, you stop by the Esesher Zagnuzis. But compared to the Eir Bli Gvul, remember, the Kav is Yesh Ma'ayin. Nish Gili Ahelim. Remember that?
Yes.
That's a critical component, because Gili Ahelim is in our parameters. It means we can... Yesh Ma'ayin means it's a quantum leap. So he's trying to make the case that the Bli Gvul travels into the Gvul, and the Gvul can go into the Bli Gvul. How is that possible? Because the Bli Gvul Eir, Ein Sof, envisioned existence. But it's still a Rotzen Klal, there's no Pratim. But now, that means Leila Atzmi. Not that he's ignorant of it, it means he doesn't relate to the details. That means Leila Atzmi. Why is it when your consciousness, when you said you want a home, you don't even think of the details? We're not talking about the plan yet. Why is that? That's not because you are oblivious, or because you're stupid, or because you're lacking. It's because the energy of the home is all that matters to you. I don't care about the details. You could say, God says, I don't care about the individuals. I just want the final picture. When you give me the final picture, all the individuality is out the window. It was just a stepping stone. Chassidus is mechadish, the individuality is relevant all the way to the top. That's the whole point here. So, Gili Lata Atzme means that the detail may not be relevant to that level. All I care is the klal. Then he says, that's the Baruch Hu. We want that to be relevant too. We want you to be Meshayir. Like God could say, you know what? I want a data b'tachtenim, I'm going to send shluchim to go build it for you. They say, no, we want you to apply yourself to my details. Does the Rebbe think about you as an individual? Or he sends other people to talk to you as an individual? Do you understand what I'm saying? You want it in God's consciousness that he should be thinking about me. Gili la'atzmi. I don't want to just know that he has me in the big picture as a result of whatever he wants to have from this whole thing. You could go back, like what he said in the previous chapter, the simcha of Avedis HaBerurim. That's all he cares about. The etzem. We're talking about as the etzem. The etzem, all he cares about is the simcha of Avedis HaBerurim. The details don't really matter. So bottom line is, he's saying no. The Baruch Hu comes and says that now the Ratzon is coming to a Gili. By point, I'm trying to point out is the interface. When you have the infinite divine and you have the finite existence, they start getting closer to each other. You could always argue that that the infinite divine does not care about the finite, only to a certain extent. What he's trying to show here is that the God's consciousness slowly becomes more and more shaped in that consciousness and does not jump a level. That means we can retrace the steps. That's the bottom line here. That's the whole meaning of Gilui. It's not just a nice madrege, Gilui Atzmi, not Gilui. Who really cares? It's like when people would say, does the Rebbe think about me? Me personally. Or he thinks about Klal Yisrael, and I'm one of the details there somewhere in the big picture. That's what it comes down to. So the answer is Hashara B'Keach. He envisioned Chesed and Gvura and Chochmah and Bina and so on. We're not talking about what state it's in. It could be completely amorphous, but it's 10 and not 11. So you have that. However you twist it, he's envisioned it Obviously, it's all on a God consciousness level, so you don't have any spheres. You have no kalim, you have no edus. So that's what he's saying. So Baruch Hu brings it down to the level. Let's continue. So there's 2 stages. As he said, the Rishus and Rotzna HaMelech in the Erein Sof came a Rotzen, and then Golav Galif was stage 2. It creates a Chakika, an engraving of a Hashara, an envisioning of. Let's pause a moment. Clear or not clear? Okay, so here we go. Erein Sof, Rotzen, it's not even Gili La'atzmei, and now Hashara, a Gili La'atzmei.
At Boruch.
Huh?
At Boruch.
That's the Baruch, yeah. And all this, when you say Baruch Shamar, Haya Elam, Baruch Hu, the Baruch Shamar is saying that Shamar, there should be an Amida coming from the Erein Sof into Rotzen, but it's a Rotzen that's still Klali. Yeah, that's, and the parentheses, and now why the parentheses is so critical. I see now the parentheses being so critical. Because he's qualifying. It's all Gili La'atzmei. He says, no. In detail, there's a level where he's already thinking about the details of the spheres. That's the Gili La'atzmei. And there's a level that's not yet even that. Even though in general it's already a Gili La'atzmei, because, let's be honest, in general terms, the whole Eir is a Gili La'atzmei. Because before, in Atzmos, there's no Gili La'atzmei either. Right. But when you break it down, it comes down to there's a level called, it was already thinking, like he says, Ashara, Gili La'atzmei, and there's a level that's not even La'atzmei yet.
So V'hoya,
in other words,
is V'hoya before the Ashara?
Let's put it this way. The interesting thing is, maybe I should add this, because to me it's a given, but I see I haven't spelled it out. One of the big things here is like this. You see, when we work from the bottom up, you come like this. Okay, I have a relationship with you. It starts as a superficial relationship. Then we build it. Now we got to know more about each other. We start speaking more intimately. Meaning, I know what's going on in your heart, in your soul. Two people who care. You go deep, deep, deep. But then there's an etzem that you never reveal to me, I never reveal my etzem to you. That's the usual way of thinking. So our connection is to a certain extent. Maybe sometimes it goes even deeper. Nafshik shura b'nafshi. There is higher levels. But the bottom line is, that's how we think. Remember, from Atzma's point of view, all this was put into motion. So the question is, why is there an etzem in us in the first place? We don't have that question, because by us we think in terms of course, I'm me, you're you. The chiddush is that we can communicate, not the chiddush is that I have individuality. But from the point of view of Atzmos, there's no consciousness. So the point is, even etzem harotzen was also put there, as he said, by rotzen. God wanted it there. Why did he give us that level? So even the atzmi, that's not to be revealed to others, is also in general also for it to be expressed ultimately. Because that's why did he put it there? That's the real point here, if you want to go really deeper. That the whole Erein Sof, even Etzem Ha'er, is really for the Zulas. But its personality is only to reveal the Etzem. You understand what I'm saying? So it's like it's a twist. Huh?
Its characteristics.
Right, exactly. But if you talk about Chalolos, of course, the whole thing is, there'd be no Erein Sof if at Tzimtzum there was no existence. But if you remember at length, he was bothered by the line that it says, that's L'tzeirach Ha'elam is the Esesphiris. Where Makiv is not L'tzeirach Ha'elam. And he says, what do you mean it's not L'tzeirach? It also has a purpose. But he keeps saying its purpose is no purpose. That's the point. In other words, the fact that there's an Eir Atzmi that we can talk about and tell us that God doesn't even know in his own consciousness, even in his own consciousness, he's not aware of the spheres, is also for us. Because that means there's a level that we can relate to like that. That gives us a little sense of him, how he is on his own. Because everything we know about him is only how he relates to us, then you don't really know him. So the mere fact that two people can connect, and I know there's a part I can't get about you, that makes my relationship deeper with you, not more distant. Because on our terms, we want control. If you don't tell me everything in your etzem, I don't have a connection to your etzem. That's not true. Who says it has to be control? Maybe my relationship with you is that there are parts that I never get. And that's the relationship. Yeah, exactly. Or you could say in spouses, for sure that's the way. The mystique of the other person is necessary for the relationship. You don't have to get everything about each other. Who said, if you don't get anything about the other person, then there's no closeness. I don't know who you are. But to say that your etzem has to be on my terms? No, it should be on your terms, and that's the relationship. Remember I said yesterday, Havdalah is Agdus. The fact that you know something's beyond you makes you closer to, not that makes you far, if you also have closeness. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
In other words, there's two aspects to love. One is the things we get about each other, the things we relate to each other, and then there's another aspect that I love you even if I don't get it, because it doesn't have to be on my seichel. There's a different type of connection there. That's the point, that every level is relevant to the whole picture. Anyway, that's what he said here. So we have the levels. Technically, Eid Ein Sof, Rotzen HaKloli, there's no details, Baruch Sha'amar, Reishum and then Reishum Nus of the Malka, then comes Gol of Galifu. Huh? For how he taught, but two interpretations.
So the simcha of what?
The Birurim, the Tachlis of the world.
So those are the Tachlis, the Nikud of...
That's one interpretation, there's two. V'hoya. Okay, let's continue.
Right.
It's emerging. Okay. V'kol zeh b'erin sof shalifnei atzimtzum. I love it. All this is erin sof lifnei atzimtzum, which is basically which you don't really even get. But the Rebbe Rashab is gone there. Okay, I love it. So, the kol and all this is be'erin sof shalifnei atzimtzum, is in the infinite light before the tzimtzum. Ve'ein shaykh adayin sheyisavas elamis. And it's not shaykh yet. It's not possible yet for there to be the existence of the worlds. The gam b'chinas ha'ashara b'keach ha'kol be'erin sof. Because even the Hashara B'keach, the lowest level that he just talked here, it's all within the infinite light. Even the envisioning, even the where it's Gili La'atzmei, is revealed to himself. She'ena Berech Yisavas Adayin. It's not Berech Yisavas. It's not commensurate yet to any type of existence and creation. How long is this next parenthesis? Not a short one, huh? I'll read it. The Gam B'chinas Ha'eres Din is Baralel Perek Tazayin or Perek Chav Zayin. Because even the energies that discussed earlier in chapter 16 and chapter 27, the that the root of the energies, we learned there, that's the hashara that he envisioned to radiate, illuminate in a form of midah gvul, a form of measure, and parameter and that's the root of mamal kalam, an imminent energy. So the what is he saying? It's not shaykh to Yisavos. We just said the Eris. Right, he just said that that's where the root of all the energies are in existence. He said this before, but I'm glad he's saying it again because it's confirming it. Because nevertheless, compared to the Kav, it's still in a state of Makif for Seviv. Like it says elsewhere. He said it earlier also. If you remember, he said several places, he said Eses Sagnuzis, it's Makif and all that. So he said there that because remember he said legabe kenu asviras is shefa, but legabe it's eir. That's back in chapter 59. That means it's still separate. See, Havdalah is using Havdalah from the level of the kava. Kolshken b'chinas hakelim. And definitely the level of the containers. Even the energies are Havdalah. Definitely the envisioning in the infinite light before the Tzimtzum is a form of Havdalah Be'erech, separate and apart. Because the containers, their distance from the source of the containers compared to their root and their source is more and greater than the distance of the Eris to their source. The Be'eris, he's saying over some things he said before, but he's tying it together. We shouldn't be confused. The Be'eris, because in Eris, even when it's completely Gili, even when it's a substance called air within the containers, it's still not substance. It still retains its transcendent nature, as we spoke. I say here transcendent, I don't mean makif. I mean to say it's not yesh.
Not tangible.
Yeah, it's not yesh. It's not an identity of its own. It's chesed, but it's not an identity of its own. It senses its source. Except its source is now in a very clear, defined way. The klol she'er had b'chinas ayin, because the general ayin is a form of ayin. state of substanceless. You see, he's tying everything together from the earlier chapters, like we learned earlier, chapter 14. At the end of the day, the air becomes mitzias substances. At the end of the day, it becomes mokum nevertheless through the keli, through the container. Meaning, even though the air has within it the definition tzir, it's still the keli that really gives it its substance, because it still retains its element of ayin. V'im kain. So if that's the case, so the distance of air to the root and its source is not as great like it is in the container, because they are an identity and a personality of substance. Now he goes on, the root of the container, the root of the containers, that's the letters of the Rishimu. Rishimu is the impression that remains after the Tzimtzum. This is the goal of Galufa. What did he engrave? He engraved shape. That's the containers, the root of the containers. Actually, I should read it differently. He's qualifying it. He says, and that which we say that the root of the containers is in goal of Galifu, so you could say, hey, it's also be'erech. You just said that oyer is closer to tzors than kelim. Kelim are also rooted in what we just said in the engraving, the kol of Galifu. There, they're completely not a metzias. And that's why we explained earlier in chapter 10, that we can say that the containers, compared to their root and source before the tzimtzum, are completely, infinitely distant. Not like the oyer, which is not. See, here again the interface is critical. Let me just explain. The containers, remember, represent the ultimate distinction and division, and differentiation and diversity of existence. Clear? Even Eir Pnimi in the Kelim is still a form of transcendence, relatively speaking. Obviously, Makif is even more. What he's saying here is basically that we need the Kelim to be distant like this, because you need a real existence. You need a real parameters of existence. But compared to their source, they're completely shalei berach. Oyer, on the other hand, has shape and form, but it retains much more of its divine personality.
Does it change drastically as it goes down? It doesn't change drastically?
It does. We spoke the 3 levels. It does change. I don't know the word drastic, but there's change. It goes through. It never loses its transcendent nature. That never happens.
Less bittul.
Well, later in the later chapters,
less bittul.
Less bittul to the essence of the source. It's, I don't know, but the word less, you have to explain what means more and less. Okay, let's see. Yeah, but okay, fine. It's not, we'll get to that. He's not discussing that right now. So if so, we understand that the Ashara B'keich is not. That's that he's explaining what he said before the parentheses. Shalei Berach. Yeah, the Kelim for sure. Eid also Shalei Berach, because he said Lagabi the Kav, it's still Seviv, but Kolshkein. All this was. There's 2 parts that he's explaining why it's Shalei Berach. One mitzad the Eid, because even though the Eid is rooted in the essence for the Sagnuzis, but that remains a Seviv Lagabi the Kav. Then he says the Kolshkein. The containers are definitely infinitely distant. That's what he's discussing now in the second half. But he said both. However, here we're speaking about the infinite divine light. So he's going even more higher. Not the Hashara itself. Not the level of Eir in the essence of Sagnuzis, but the Bligvul Eir that is envisioning. So there's 2 states here. Do you do it? The Kedem HaTzimtzum HaYe'eres of Meir Begili Mamash Be'esis Sarashuma. Because it's known that before the Tzimtzum, the infinite light was radiated Mamash in a revealed way, literally in a revealed way, in the letters of the Rishimu, that would later be left after the Tzimtzum. Va'ere Ein Sof Loi Miboy K'meishu B'chinas Rotzna Poshet. And Ere Ein Sof, not just the level that's Rotzna Poshet, Torem HaYishara Kavyachol. Rotzna Poshet, that's even before the envisioning. She'ena Be'erech HaYisavos. Not only that, that's completely beyond, not commensurate to creation. But also the way it's even the level of Ashara, it's not be'erach te'isavos. That's the end of the parentheses.
I just didn't get just some technicalities yet. The union of Rishimu. Isn't Rishimu we're talking about what's left after the Tzimtzum?
Yeah, but where is it rooted? Yeah, because the Rishimu is a word of an impression that's left after the Tzimtzum, but the Rishimu come from before the Tzimtzum. That's what he means. That's what he means. Yeah. The containers of the goal of Galifu. So basically what he said right now was the following. He's saying that there's not Shaykh yet Hisavus in this level. He explained both from the level of Eir, because it still remains Seviv, even though the Eir is rooted in the Hashara. So even Hashara, he explained, is the Chiddush. Even that's infinitely distant from Hisavus. But the key thing is that the main thing discussing here, he's talking before here, remember he's talking about the Eir and Sof Ablikvul, that's why I said the two Ritzenis. He's talking the Be'er Gvul HaMeshayed, that's the Ratzon HaPoshet. Understand? Before he has the activator, that level that he spoke before in the parentheses, that where it's not even a Gili La'atzmei. He's saying even the Gili La'atzmei is also Shlei Berach to Hasavus. That's the point. The Gili not to Atzmei is for sure Shlei Berach. That's what he said before.
Okay, let me have a visual aces.
What time is it now?
22 minutes before
11. And in order for there to be Savas, you need to have the Tzimtzum. That's the point there. So in other words, even though it's rooted before the Tzimtzum, even the Eir and stuff, in the Hashara, you need to have the Tzimtzum. Shehu b'chinas siluk Eir, quantum leap, siluk Eir, complete removal of the energy. V'ayim Hashem zbar le'el Perek Chof Hei, Perek Chof Ches. And look what he said earlier, chapter 28. Another parenthesis. This one ends. And it's known that through this removal of the energy, the Esis Harashimu become a Metzias. Just for the record, he said that the Kelim are rooted in Gal of Galifu, and aren't we saying that the Eris are rooted in the Esespheres Agnuzis? Because the Esespheres Agnuzis themselves have two parts. There's the Eir in them. Right. So he's not negating what Ramak says in Pardes, that the Esespheres Agnuzis is the root of the Kelim. He's just saying it's also the root of the energies.
Because energies also have a theory, you said.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But the energies are closer to their root than the Kelim are, for the obvious reasons. Because they're more tangible. The Eiros still remain somewhat Ayin. And compared to this goes back to what he said. If you remember, he said that Eir, compared to its root in the Esespheres Agnuzis, is Gilead Helam. Remember, he spoke two types of Tzimtzumim. But the Eir HaBligvul, even the Eir HaGvul, is Shalei Be'erech to it. So there's a Yesh Mayin. It's similar to what he's saying here. But what he's saying here is that even Eir HaGvul of Kav, compared to Eir HaSherish in Esespheres Agnuzis, in the Hashad is also a certain Havdalah. That's what he's adding here. And for sure compared to higher, which is what is being discussed here. The thing he added that he didn't say before the word, he said Hamashayir, Eir Insaf Hamashayir. He said it before, that's the word where the Eir HaBligvul is the one that envisions the Eir HaGvul. Okay, so now we have the Eir Shim as a Metzias, fine. He's adding this parenthesis, I assume, is because what he said earlier, he wanted to say that the Kelim are Metzias. And that means they're very distant from their source. But we said they're sourced in the Gol of Galifu. The answer is they're not a Metzias at all. The Tzimtzum, that's what he's adding in the parenthesis. Remember, now he's trying to explain the big jump that has to happen from before the Tzimtzum. So this is all Baruch Sha'amar V'Haya Elam. Baruch Hu is all Lifnei HaTzimtzum.
Okay.
Right? Baruch Hu also. It's Ashara. V'zeu Sha'acha Baruch Hu. Now comes the next. And that's after Baruch Hu. After we say Baruch Hu, B'chinas Ashara Shalifnei HaTzimtzum, Eimer Baruch Eimer V'Eisa. That's the hemshech of the tefillah, of the davening. After Baruch Hu, where you were mamshech from the Eir HaPoshet, Eir HaBligvul, that didn't even have it revealed to himself, the details. Baruch Hu, you brought it into that he should be at least revealed to himself. Okay? Hashara B'Keyach comes the next level, which comes after the Tzimtzum. Baruch Eimer, blessed Ve'esa. Now he's talking about Va'esa, that he's actually creating. This is already the word, the Amira, that's a relationship to Asiyah B'Peil, and he creates Peil Hisavas. It affects existence. This is the desire and the primordial thought of Ak, which is also, as we said, a Ratzon Klali that encompasses all of the cosmic order. Like the Maimon we said earlier, Tzefa, he gazes and sees everything. But this is now after the Tzimtzum. That's why now it's called Boruch Eimer Ve'esa. This is already a desire that's Shaykh, connected and related to action. This is already the blueprint of existence. This is what it says, Baruch Eimer Ve'esa, the Betchila Eimer. First Eimer, Sha'amar Stam. He just says, because it's not yet a relationship to Asiyah. Yeah.
Eimer is before.
1 second. Rak Eimer. There's only saying, Sha'amar V'hoya Elam. 1 second. Let's finish reading. We're reading in the middle of a sentence. Let's finish the sentence here. Because he says V'hoya Elam. That's Baruch Sha'amar V'hoya Elam. Shua Ratzali is Dover Nivdal. That's the desire that there should be an Elam. There should be a separate entity. But there you don't have yet action. Now before you said only Baruch Sha'amar V'hoya Elam. There's no word Eisa. Baruch Sha'amar V'hoya Elam. Shamas Tam Pnei She'ena Shaykh Hadayin L'Asiyah, because that's still before the Tzimtzum. Rak Eimer Sha'amar. Baruch Sha'amar. Aval Ein Shaleh. Avakan Eimer Ve'esa. Now we're saying he says and it creates. Sheyesh L'Shaykh L'Asiyah, because that has a relationship to action. Argam Amir Zui B'chinas Machshav V'Rotzon Hadayin. Yet still, it's still called Eimer Ve'esa. It's after the Tzimtzum. It's the Ak. This is Argam Amir Zui B'chinas Machshav V'Rotzon Hadayin. Still, this speaking is still a form of thought and a desire. Still, Shezayin Eimer Ve'esa Damid He Belev. Because here too, it still says Eimer Ve'esa. It's related to Esa, but Amira speaking is in the heart. Omnam Baruch Gezer Mekayim. Then comes the next line, Baruch Gezer Mekayim. Blessed is he who decrees and fulfills and realizes that's now the Gzeira B'dibur. Now you're ready, a Gzeira Baruch Gezer Mekayim. You're no longer saying Eimer. Then now he's coming a Gzeira B'dibur that he's decreeing with words. That there should be the actual Kiyum Hadover, the sustenance of the item, the object. For example, a melech, a king that decrees, he says in words that it should be so and so. So for sure this will be fulfilled. Once he decrees it in words, it'll definitely be. However, when it's still in his thought alone, could be that it won't come yet into action. Or it'll take a lot of time. However, once he decrees it in words, it will definitely be immediately. The same thing. This is an example for above. It says Gezer Mekayim. He decrees and fulfills. That it should come into dibur, into words. That's Yitzira de Klolos. So what we have is Atzilus. We said is the level of Baruch Shama V'Hoya Elam Hashara. Baruch Hu, actually, I would say Baruch Hu is Atzilus de Klolos. Then comes the first level Ak, which is Bria de Klolos. That's Baruch Eimer Ve'esa. Now Yitzira de Klolos is B'cheshu B'chinas is Galus Ma'ak. That's already a revelation from Ak. Ak is already connected to action Asiyah, but it's still Amira Belev. It's still Arotzon Klali. The next Makif, the next level is Yitzira de Klolos. Gezer Mekayim. And we can say, according to what we discussed earlier, chapter 65, V'samach 66, the Machshava Agdum Da'ak, that the primordial thought of Ak, who b'chinas has heskem levad adayin. It's only a heskim. It's the higher level where he just determines and resolves. But it's not yet a literal desire that is in motion. Which means that the levels after the tzimtzum, ak is only a form of determination. And it's not yet forced, it's not yet compelled. You don't yet say that the existence is actually going to come into being. Because it still needs a second ratzon for that to happen. Remember, that was the ratzon of Atzilus. Therefore, that which emerges from Ak, because as soon as it arises in his mind, it immediately creates, as we discussed earlier, chapter 60. It's not yet in a form of Metzias. Let me finish reading the whole thing, then I'll explain it. I'm not going to explain it by line. I'm reading the whole thing, and then I'll explain it. He's referring to things he discussed earlier. It's all consistent. I said, but let's finish reading it. It's not yet a Metzias. Like it says in Eschayim, that the containers of Ak, sometimes it doesn't even say there are containers there. But even when it says containers, they're just shadish, they're just the root of the souls of bodies. That's the expression. So essentially very ethereal. But the level of dibur, not machshava, which is Ak, speaking. That's a general, the macrocosmic yitzira, nisava miyad. They actually immediately come into being. As opposed to, they're still in a state of an ethereal state, or they're not yet coming into action, or even if they do, what comes into action is not yet a Metzias. Here they come into immediate Metzias. This is what it says in Eitz Chaim, Shara Kudim. The gate of Shara Kudim, that the beginning of containers are an Akudim, not an Ak. And even though there's 10 energies in one container, nevertheless it's called a Keli. It's still a stage of Kelim. A degree. Then comes the final step, Baruch Eisa Bereshis. So then comes Eisa Bereshis, that's Asiyah the Klolos. This is now the world of Atzilus, which is called Asiyah in general. This is the Kelim of Atzilus Sheheim, B'chinas Metzias Dover. They are of real substance. The Keli of Akudim, you could say, is like the seed. Now the seed, I think, fits more to Akudim. But now it comes into full-blown Kelim, and substance, that's an Atzilus. Now if you remember, he called Atzilus the real Rotzen, not the Rotzen Heskim, just for the record. But he's breaking it down in more details here, because there's stages. That meaning Eisa Bereishis is that he creates Bereishis existence. That's the level of Chochmah, which is called Reishis. Reishis, the Fishi Reishis Ishtalshus. Chochmah is the beginning of all Ishtalshus. And compared to Ein Sof, Chochmah is Asiyah. Like we look, you made everything with Asiyah. This goes back to what he spoke much earlier in chapter 6 or 7. That Chochmah, Legabe, you have to say that Chochmah is still Yesh Ma'ayin. And that's where we went into the whole discussion of what we just said here, that is because it's Shalei Berech to Bli Gvul. Era Bli Gvul. And now even to Era Gvul in a certain way. So Reishis is now an Atzilus. So Pirush Eisa Bereishis, what is Eisa Bereishis? Masha Chochmah B'chinas Asiyah. So Eisa Bereishis means that he creates Asiyah. Masha Chochmah B'chinas Asiyah. That's what Eisa Bereishis. Bereishis is Chochmah. Eisa Bereishis is to emphasize how Chochmah is Asiyah now, not the element of Chochmah as it is rooted in Bittul, but how Chochmah is now the beginning of existence. Remember, because we spoke about Chochmah also having Koyach Bittul. Not just Chochmah, and also, read it differently. But the Eisa Bereishis is referring to that Chochmah is a level of Asiyah, and also what through Chochmah is the creation and the bringing into being of all the worlds in actuality. In the beginning, Bereishis bara, but Chochmah bara. So two things mean Eisa Bereishis. One, the Asiyah of Chochmah, and the second is that with Chochmah you create. Eisa Bereishis, that Bereishis is Eisa. There's two ways to take. You could say Eisa goes on Bereshis, he creates Bereshis. You could say that Bereshis creates Eisa. Because b'chokhmah sabara, with wisdom he creates. B'chokhmah yivna bayis. With wisdom you build a home. So basically what he's saying like this, and then tell me if you have any questions, okay? He's saying like this. There's, in Tehillah law, there's the level of Lifnei Tzimtzum Boruch, where the Gili, the revelation that of the Ratzon comes at least to himself. That's the 10 hidden spheres. That's, however, Shalei Berech to Yisavus, as he explained, Eris and Kalim. You need a Tzimtzum. After the Tzimtzum now begins Boruch, Eimer Ve'esa. So now you have the beginning. It's not just an Eimer within himself. Now it's Esa, it's connected to existence. But it's not yet in existence. It's still Amir Belev. Then Gezer and Mekayim comes a Dibur. And at least a Keli emerges. That's Akudim. Okay? So now the king isn't just thinking about what he's decreeing. He actually now has decreed in words. So Imach Shavak Dume, like he says, that's still a Heskim. Hasn't yet come out in an expressed way. We said when God thinks something creates, yeah, but that creation is so amorphous that it's not a reality that we can relate to.
Like the Tzimtzum itself was from Machshava only before David being there.
Not Tzimtzum, I'm talking about Ak now.
Yeah, so there was a Tzimtzum, and that was before.
After the Tzimtzum comes Oymer V'Oisa. Ak is a general desire that's like the blueprint of all of existence, but it's still without containers. So you can only say it's still a thought, but it's a thought that it's related now to action. Whereas before the Tzimtzum it's not.
That's all from Machshava.
Ak, only Ak. Right. Then Dibur, before that there was, no, before the Tzimtzum is a different level. Before the Tzimtzum there's not even Machshava. There you're talking here. You're talking to himself, yeah. Then comes Dibur, which is crazy too. It comes now a container. Okay? So in other words, you're basically saying that the Ratzon that has now come from Heskim has now come into some type of reality, but it's fully blown in the next stage, Baruch Eisa Bereshis in Atzilus, which is now the full containers. And here you have Asiya, and you have containers, and you have and that's Chochmah. Chochmah, the two interpretations are Eisa Ma'isa Bereshis. Kitzer. Summary, V'hini ba'Ratzon anal enim nikorim apratim gam le'latzmi kavyochel. Now this Ratzon, this higher desire, it just has a desire. The Ratzon that's the Bereshim Nusa de Malka that comes after in the Erein Sof.
This is before Golif Grid.
Yeah. Is not, the details are not recognizable even to himself, so to speak. Kavyochel. Valkain, Shir ba'atzmi mash'osel, that's why Shir, that he's adding an alkain that he didn't say. That's why he needs the Shir atzmi. Because he needs to now identify it within himself. It's like the artist has all the possibilities. Now he has to identify within himself. That alkain is interesting. That he has not said before. Yeah, but it's a Nachamadrege. In other words, listen, my point is when you climb the mountain, you have something to hold on to.
Right, yeah. So he made it like that.
Yeah,
so
exactly, correct. Masha Asali is who inyan Golav Galifu. It's beautiful, Taich and Golav Galifu. Because in other words, he's engraving within himself it's not a factual engraving, but and there's the energy part of it, and there's the kalim part of it. Yeah. V'zeu Boruch, that's Boruch. V'gam ze ena be'erech shiyim b'zei savaz l'fnei tzimtzum yagam b'chinas hashor yagil eretz sof habligvu. And also this is infinitely distant from existence, because before the tzimtzum, even the hashara, even within the hashara was the revelation of the infinite divine light. It's also a little different than what he said before.
Everything is le'atzmei, b'chlos.
Okay, yeah. It's consistent to everything you said before. This is this should be very much compared to chapter 59. Just for the record. Let me just look at 59. I just might need to make sure I'm talking about 59, good. This is connected to 59 big time. Good. Yeah. So then you need it. And through the tzimtzum comes the removal of the energy completely. So it brought to being the primordial thought of Ak. So what needs explanation, what's the difference between Machshava Shaykh Lepel and Machshava Gili La'atzmei? So you have to say in machshava itself, the hashara b'kayach is still within consciousness of the artist, but he's now at least created some envisioning. But it's not. He's not yet ready to go to the canvas. Yeah, right. And this is already. He's going to actually ready to reveal it to the student or to the reality. Is that Emer ve'esa? Meaning that it's only a resolution alone. How then afterwards comes the revealing of the Rotzah Gezer and Mekayim, the Klolos. Okay, so comes Gezer and Mekayim where he actually decrees and to be fulfilled, which is already Yitzira the Klolos. Yitzira has already now not just Bria general, but Yitzira shape. The close. Then comes Eisa Bereshis, now the seal the close. Now you can really start saying Baruch Shamar. Can you imagine? Would you ever say Baruch Shamar the same way?
Yeah, I would really. I remember.
I know, but
if you'll be around, you'll remind me.
Interesting, huh? Baruch Shamar. You could just spend your whole life on Baruch Shamar. Now, 1 second, I want to say this. Right? You can spend your whole life on Baruch Shamar. The question is what you need more. We still didn't even get to the elemus of the Atzilus. The Abya Pratim is going to be Adeinu Zenu.
That's Elena.
Maheidu Vatkush. So we did chapter 70, very interesting chapter. Oh man, but it's good. Page 130 to 132. Let's stop here.